My name is Elias, and my first memory is not of a mother's lullaby, but of the rhythm of her weeping. It was a low, constant hum, the sound of the world I was born into on the Rin tobacco plantation in Maryland, a sound as steady as the cicadas in the humid summer air. My world was defined by two suns, the one that beat down on the fields, cracking the earth and our skin, and the one that lived in the big house, Master Rin, whose temper could scorch a man's spirit to ash. Before I understood the words slave or freedom, I understood the geography of fear. It was in the lines on my father's face, etched not by age, but by a lifetime of holding his tongue. It was in the way the elders would stop their stories and switch to humming when an overseer passed by. Our lives were a tapestry woven with threads of quiet defiance. We were property, yes, but we were not objects. In the secret shade of the woods, in the hushed corners of our cabins after dark, we were a people. Father taught me the names of the stars, not as distant lights, but as a map. Mama taught me the songs, not just for their melody, but for their meaning. Follow the drinking gourd, she'd sing, her voice a whisper against my ear, and I knew she wasn't just talking about a ladle for water. She was planting a seed of north in my soul. The hook, the moment my world fractured and rearranged itself into a brutal clarity, came on my 8th birthday. It wasn't a celebration. There were no cakes, no gifts. My gift was a new reality. Master Rin had sold a neighboring farmer a lot of 5 hands, and my Aunt Jemima and her 2 young children were part of it. I remember the auction block, a crude stump in the center of the yard. I remember the men poking and prodding her like livestock. But what I can never forget is the sound of her son, little Samuel, screaming for his mother as they pulled him away, and the look on my mother's face, a silent, bottomless well of grief. That night, she didn't weep. She held me tight, her body rigid, and whispered, "They can own our bodies, Elias. They can sell our children, but they cannot own our souls. Don't you ever let them." That was the day I stopped being a boy. The injustice was no longer a vague shadow. It was a monster with a face, a name, and an address. I began to see the plantation not as my world, but as my prison. My resistance started small, a misplaced tool that delayed the morning's work, a misunderstood order that sent a wagon to the wrong field. These were tiny rebellions, invisible sparks in a vast darkness, but they were mine. They kept my soul from being owned. It was also when I truly saw Sarah. We had grown up together, 2 saplings in the same blighted forest, but after that day, I saw the same fire I felt in myself reflected in her eyes. We didn't need words. We would communicate with a glance, a shared nod, as the overseer, Mr. Davies, cracked his whip. We were allies in an undeclared war. My life took another turn when I was 12. The master's wife, Eleonora Rin, took a liking to my quiet demeanor. She was a woman trapped in her own gilded cage, a northerner married into the southern aristocracy, and her loneliness was a palpable thing, a perfume of sorrow that clung to her fine dresses. She had me brought into the big house to be a house servant. I polished silver, served meals, and stood silent in corners, becoming a piece of the furniture. But I was not furniture. I was a spy. The big house was a different kind of hell. The violence was less physical, but more insidious. Here the chains were invisible. I saw the master's casual cruelty to his own wife, the way he dismissed her, belittled her. In her, I saw a different kind of bondage. Our eyes would sometimes meet across the dining room, a silent acknowledgement of our shared prison. I knew even then that this strange connection, this fragile flicker of what some might mistake for love in chains, was a dangerous thing. It was a potential weapon or a potential trap. I started stealing knowledge. I'd watch the master's son during his lessons, memorizing the shapes of letters. I'd trace them in the dust, in the condensation on a window pane. The alphabet became my first set of keys. The other servants, They had their own ways of preserving who they were. Old man Titus in the kitchens would tell stories of Anansi the spider, tales of the small outsmarting the powerful. His voice a low rumble that felt like a piece of Africa itself, right there in Maryland. We would hold secret prayer meetings in the woods, our hymns a blend of Christian faith and the rhythms of our ancestors, a spiritual armor against the daily degradation. I knew I couldn't stay. The memory of Samuel's screams was a constant fire in my gut. My goal was clear: freedom, not just for me. A double escape was forming in my mind. A dream of running north with Sarah, of building a life where our children would never see an auction block. But to do that, I needed more than just courage. I needed a plan. I needed resources. And as I stood in the shadows of the big house, watching the lonely, rich wife, a terrible and daring idea began to take shape. I would have to navigate the treacherous waters of her affection, a twisted kind of love in chains, to gain my freedom. It was a path fraught with moral peril, a betrayal in the making, but I saw no other way. My life as a spy, as a secret student, as a future fugitive had begun. The rich wife and her gilded cage might just be the key to unlocking my own, but I feared what it would cost my soul. I had to believe that a future with Sarah, a real double escape to freedom, was worth any price. The big house was a library of secrets, and I became its most dedicated, albeit invisible, librarian. While polishing the mahogany desk in Master Rin's study, my eyes would devour the words on open pages. The Liberator, the North Star, abolitionist papers the master kept to rage at, to show his visitors the madness of the North. For him, they were proof of his righteousness. For me, they were gospel. They were proof that a world beyond the plantation existed, a world where men and women who looked like me were fighting, writing, and speaking out. They were proof that I was not alone. My education was a crime. Every letter I learned to form, every word I pieced together, was an act of rebellion punishable by the lash, or worse. Eleonora, the Basharich wife, became my unwitting teacher. She would read poetry aloud in the afternoons, her voice drifting through the quiet house. I would linger outside the parlor, pretending to dust, but truly, I was listening to the cadence, the shape of the language. Sometimes, she would leave a book of poems by her settee. I'd risk a glance, my heart pounding a frantic drum against my ribs, matching the letters I had stolen with the sounds I had heard. Byron, Keats, Shelley. They wrote of love, loss, and a yearning for a freedom I understood on a level they could never imagine. One evening, she found me. I was in the library long after the family had retired, a single candle casting flickering shadows. In my hand was a copy of a map of the northern states. I'd been tracing the lines with my finger, whispering the names of towns in Pennsylvania. When her shadow fell over me, I froze. This was it, the end. I expected a scream, the summoning of the master. Instead, there was only silence. I looked up into her pale, tired eyes. She didn't look angry. She looked intrigued. "You can read?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I could only nod, my throat tight with fear. She stepped closer and pointed to the map. "What are you looking for?" My mind raced. A lie could save me, but looking at her, seeing the bars of her own cage reflected in her eyes, I chose a dangerous truth. "A way out," I said. She didn't speak for a long moment. She simply looked from the map to my face, and a complex, unreadable expression passed over her features. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to recognition. From that day on, our secret changed. She began leaving books for me, not by accident, but on purpose. Books on geography, on history, and newspapers, always newspapers. It was through these that I learned the mechanics of the world and the name that became my guiding light, the Underground Railroad. The papers spoke of it in hushed, coded terms. Goods delivered, packages arriving safely. I learned of conductors, of stations, of the web of brave souls, black and white, who risked everything to shepherd people like me to freedom. My special skill became navigation. I committed maps to memory. I learned to read the moss on trees, to understand the flow of creeks, to use the stars not just as a general direction, but as a precise celestial compass. While the other house servants saw me as quiet and obedient, I was mentally charting my escape. Every trip to the nearby town with the master was a reconnaissance mission. I noted the patrol schedules, the locations of bridges, the dense woods that could offer cover. My resistance grew bolder, but remained subtle. I learned about herbs and remedies from Old Man Titus, not just to help our people, but to create concoctions that could make the hunting dogs unwell on a given night. I learned to mimic the calls of night birds, a system of signals Sarah and I developed. A whippoorwill's call meant danger. A screech owl's cry meant all clear. The alliance with Eleonora was my most dangerous tool. It was a constant performance, a dance on a razor's edge. I would bring her an extra flower for her vase. I would listen to her laments about her husband, offering a sympathetic ear. This was the foundation of my strategy, a false love in chains. I felt a profound guilt, for I was using her loneliness, her unhappiness, as a stepping stone. But then I would see Sarah in the fields, her back bent under the sun, and my resolve would harden. This wasn't for me alone. This was for our double escape. The more I learned, the more I understood the true evil of the system. It wasn't just the whip, it was the theft of knowledge. To keep a man ignorant is to keep him in a deeper, more profound bondage. Frederick Douglass wrote of this, how learning to read was his pathway from slavery to freedom. It was a divine revelation that showed him the horrible pit, but also the ladder by which to get out. I was building my ladder, rung by painful rung. The talk of Nat Turner's rebellion, though years passed, still hung in the air like smoke. The master and his friends would speak of it, their voices low and venomous. It was their justification for every new cruelty, every tightening of the codes. But for us, in the cabins, the name Nat Turner was a whispered legend, a symbol that resistance could be more than just a broken tool. It was a terrifying, bloody reminder of the stakes, but it was a reminder of agency too. My plan was becoming more than a dream. It was becoming a blueprint. I had the knowledge, I had a co-conspirator in Sarah, and I had a potential, unwitting benefactor in the poor Rick wife. The guilt of my deception was a heavy cloak, but the hope of freedom was a fire that warmed me from within. The girl Love in Chains was a fiction, but the chains were real, and I would use that fiction to break them. The double escape was no longer a matter of if, but when. The next 2 years were a masterclass in patience and deception. My life was a dual existence. By day, I was Elias, the quiet house servant, attentive and invisible. By night, in the scant hours between the master's last demand and the rooster's first crow, I was a strategist, a cartographer, a revolutionary plotting the liberation of a nation of two. My bedroom, a small windowless closet off the kitchen, became my war room. Under a loose floorboard, I kept my treasures. The map I had painstakingly copied onto a piece of stolen burlap, a small compass I had bartered for with a visiting peddler, and scraps of paper with my notes, written in a crude script only I could decipher. This map was my sacred text. I had marked every creek, every dense patch of forest, every potential hiding place between the Rynn plantation and the Pennsylvania border, nearly 100 miles north. I studied the patterns of the moon. A full moon was a hunter's moon, making the fields as bright as day, a death sentence for a fugitive. We would have to travel during the dark of the new moon. Identifying allies was the most critical and dangerous part of the plan. Within our own community, trust was paramount. I confided fully in Sarah, of course, and in Old Man Titus. His wisdom was a vital resource. He had seen countless escape attempts, some successful, most ending in tragedy. "They always run in a panic, boy," he told me one night, his voice a low whisper as we sharpened tools in the smokehouse. "They run on fear. You gotta run on a plan. Fear makes you fast, but a plan makes you smart. You need to be smart." Titus was my connection to the plantation's secret history. He taught me the deeper meanings of the spirituals. "Wade in the water" wasn't just a song about baptism. It was a literal instruction to use rivers and streams to throw the dogs off your scent. He knew which of the field hands could be trusted and which ones would sell their own mother for an extra ration of molasses. His guidance was a shield against the ever-present threat of betrayal. The idea of the double escape with Sarah was the engine of my entire operation. Every risk I took was measured against the image of her face, free and smiling under a northern sky. Leaving my family, my parents, was a constant gnawing pain. The dilemma tore at me. How could I save myself and leave them in this hell? I wrestled with it every night. My mother, sensing the storm in me, gave me her answer without me ever asking the question. "Some birds gotta fly so the others know the sky's real," she said, pressing a small pouch into my hand. Inside was a piece of dried meat and a single smooth stone from the creek where I was baptized. It was not an order to go, but it was permission. It was her blessing. My preparations were meticulous and secret. For months, Sarah and I slowly built a hidden cache in a hollow log deep in the woods. Every day, we'd risk hiding a handful of dried corn, a strip of salted pork, or a piece of cloth. It was a slow, painstaking process. I lost one of the master's old hunting knives. I accidentally broke a water skin, then repaired it and hid it away. We were building our freedom one stolen crumb at a time. The most complex piece of the puzzle was Eleonora. My relationship with the rich wife had deepened into a strange, perilous intimacy. I was her confidant. She would weep to me about her miserable marriage, about her isolation. I listened, I sympathized, and I hated myself for it. This was the ugliest part of my plan. I had to nurture this fragile connection, this phantom of love in chains, and turn it into my war chest. I began to plant seeds. I spoke of a mythical brother I had in the north, a free man who owned a business. I spun a tale of wanting to buy my freedom to join him. I painted a picture of a future where I could be a man of substance. I was selling her a dream, a story where she could be a benevolent savior, a secret patron. It appealed to her romantic notions, her desire for a purpose beyond her empty life. The moral cost was immense. She would look at me with eyes full of a hope I was manufacturing. Was I any better than the master, using another person for my own gain? The thought was a venom. But then the sound of the whip would crack across the fields, and my resolve would harden. The system was the source of this evil. I was merely using its own corrupt tools against it. My betrayal of her trust was a necessary sin, a sacrifice on the altar of freedom. I studied the plantation's routines like a scholar. I knew which nights the overseer, Davies, drank too much. I knew the patrol patterns of the men he hired to guard the perimeter. I knew that during the harvest festival, the entire white population of the plantation would be drunk and distracted for a full night. That would be our window. The new moon coincided with the harvest festival in late September. The date was set. My plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, the diversion. I would use my knowledge of herbs to cause a non-lethal but chaotic sickness among the hunting dogs a day before our escape. Phase 2, the acquisition. I would make my final plea to Eleonora, securing the funds and any valuables she might offer. This would be the ultimate act of betrayal, cloaked in a promise of a future that would never be. Phase 3, the escape. Under the cover of the festival's drunken revelry, Sarah and I would slip away, meet at the hollow log, and begin our journey north, following the map in my head and the North Star in the sky. The plan was a fragile, beautiful, and terrifying thing. It was a testament to 2 years of stolen glances, whispered secrets, and quiet desperation. The dream of a double escape was about to be tested by reality. The phantom of love in chains was about to yield its bitter fruit, and the rich wife was about to become the unwitting financier of the very thing her world was built to prevent. A plan on paper is a clean and simple thing. Reality is a muddy, bloody mess. Our first attempt was not the grand escape, but a trial run, a desperate test of our theories. A month before the planned Harvest Festival escape, a traveling preacher was scheduled to hold a revival meeting 2 plantations over. It was a sanctioned event, a chance for the masters to show their piety by letting their slaves hear the gospel. For us, it was an opportunity. The roads would be busy, the patrols distracted. Sarah and I planned a small escape to run to a known maroon community, a small settlement of fugitives hidden in the great dismal swamp, a day's journey away. The goal wasn't to stay, but to see if we could do it, to test our signals, our speed, and our nerve. We used the screech owl call. I slipped out of the big house, my heart a frantic bird in my chest. Sarah met me at the edge of the woods. For a glorious hour it worked. We moved like shadows, wading through the creek to mask our scent, the water cold against our skin. The taste of freedom, even this small temporary sip, was intoxicating. We were almost to the main road when we heard the dogs. They weren't the plantation dogs. It was a lone slave catcher with his hounds, likely returning from a hunt. There was no plan for this. Panic, the enemy Titus had warned me about, seized us. We scrambled back deeper into the woods, the baying of the hounds getting closer, a sound that rips the soul from your body. We separated, a desperate, unplanned maneuver. I climbed a tree, my breath held until my lungs burned. Sarah dove into a thicket of thorns. The slave catcher passed right under me, his horse snorting in the dark. He didn't see me. After what felt like an eternity, he moved on, his dogs confused by our split scent and the creek. We had survived, but we had failed. We crept back to the plantation separately, defeated, arriving just before dawn. Our absence hadn't been noticed, but the failure was a cold weight in my gut. We had been sloppy, lucky. Luck wasn't a plan. The consequence came 2 days later, not for our attempt, but for something else entirely. Master Rin had a bad day at the market. Tobacco prices were down. He came home in a black mood, looking for a release. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, had dropped a crate of dishes. The master dragged him to the whipping post himself. I was forced to watch, along with all the other house servants. I will not describe the sound of the lash or the boy's cries. It is a sound that has no words, a sound that unmakes the world. I will describe the aftermath. I helped carry him back to the cabin. I saw my mother and the other women tend to his wounds with poultices and quiet prayers. And in that moment, my guilt over the planned deception of Eleonora, the rich wife, evaporated. My moral calculus became brutally simple. Any act, any betrayal, any lie that would deliver us from this evil was not just justified, it was righteous. The system itself was the ultimate sin. My determination was no longer just a desire, it was forged into cold, hard steel. I went back to Eleonora. The failure of our trial run had shown me a critical flaw in my plan. We were not prepared for the unexpected. We needed a better diversion, a better safety net. I intensified my performance of the devoted servant, the man caught in the tragedy of love in chains. I told her I was getting desperate, that I feared the master would sell me south to the sugar plantations of Louisiana, a known death sentence. I let her see the fear in my eyes, a fear that was entirely real. Her sympathy grew, and with it her willingness to help. She began to speak in hypotheticals. If a man wanted to travel, she'd say, he would need papers, he would need money for bribes. She was becoming an active participant in my fabricated dream. I felt like a spider weaving a web, and the guilt was still there. but it was now secondary to the mission, the double escape. With Sarah was the only thing that mattered. A new obstacle arose. Another slave, a man named Jacob, had grown suspicious of me. He saw my quiet conversations with Sarah, my long hours in the study. Jacob was a man who had found his own way to survive, by being the master's eyes and ears. He was a whisperer, an informant. I could feel his gaze on me, calculating. He was a new, unpredictable variable, a threat far greater than a random slave catcher. He could unravel everything. The support of my community became my shield. Old man Titus, seeing Jacob's suspicion, began to create a counter-narrative. He would talk loudly, when Jacob was near, about how I was sweet on the master's wife, how I was a fool who would get himself killed over a white woman. It was a brilliant deception, using the very lie I was telling Eleonora as a smokescreen. The idea of love in chains became my public cover story. My clandestine meetings with Sarah were now seen by Jacob as me complaining about my troubles with the rich wife. The impending last double escape was hidden in plain sight, disguised as a tragic, foolish romance. The failure had been a harsh teacher, but we had learned. We were stronger now, more careful. The Harvest Festival was just 2 weeks away. The 2 weeks leading up to the Harvest Festival were the longest of my life. The air on the plantation was thick, with a strange mix of forced merriment and palpable tension. My alliance with Eleonora was reaching its critical point. One evening, as I brought her a glass of sherry, she pressed a heavy purse into my hand. "This should be enough for a start," she whispered, her hand trembling. "And this." She gave me a small folded paper. It was a pass, forged in the master's hand. She had been practicing his signature for weeks. It named me as Elias, a free man of color, traveling to Philadelphia on business for Mr. Rinn. It was a masterpiece of deception, a get-out-of-jail-free card if it worked. "I will meet you," she said, her eyes wild with a desperate hope. "At the old Quaker meeting house on the Frederick Road. In 2 weeks, I will leave him, and we will start anew." The weight of her words, of the purse, of the forged pass, was immense. This was the pinnacle of my betrayal. I looked into the eyes of the rich wife and saw a woman betting her entire world on a fantasy I had constructed. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "I will be there," I lied. The words tasted like ash. This was not about a new life with her. This was about the double escape with Sarah. This was about freedom, bought with a currency of broken trust. The phantom of love in chains had finally yielded its price. Just as this crucial alliance solidified, the network of true allies revealed itself in an unexpected way. A Quaker merchant, a man named Jedediah Stone, who regularly bought tobacco from the master, sought me out. He was a known abolitionist, and I had always been terrified of him, assuming he was under constant watch. He found me near the stables, his face grim. "Titus sent me," he said, his voice low. "The wind tells me a storm is coming for you, son. The North Star is bright, but the road is dark. You cannot walk it alone." He was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. He gave me a small, carved wooden bird. "If you make it to the Susquehanna River," he said, "find a ferryman with a bird like this hanging from his lantern. His name is Ishmael. Show him the carving. He will see you across." This was it. A real connection. A station. My burlap map was a good start, but this was a key to a secret door. But as one door opened, another threatened to slam shut. The betrayal I had feared came not from Jacob, but from a place I never expected. It came from Sarah's own brother, Samuel. He was a young man, broken by the system, terrified of the master's wrath. Jacob, the informant, had gotten to him. He had promised Samuel better treatment, easier work, in exchange for information. Samuel, in a moment of weakness and fear, had told Jacob about the hollow log, about our cache of supplies. Sarah found out. I will never forget the look on her face, a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "He's my brother, Elias," she wept, "but he has betrayed us." We had to act fast. Jacob would surely go to the master, but he would wait. He would wait until the night of the escape to catch us in the act, to make his reward the greatest. This gave us a window. That night, under the sliver of a dying moon, Sarah and I moved the cash. We left a few worthless items behind, enough to make it look like the cash was still there. Our new hiding place was in the old abandoned root cellar near the swamp, a place filled with spiders and ghosts of the past, a place no one ever went. The test of trust was absolute. Could I trust Sarah to forgive her brother? Could she trust me to navigate the lies I was telling the rich wife? Could we trust the quiet strength of our community, who now worked subtly to misdirect Jacob, to feed him false information, to protect us? We had to. The day of the harvest festival arrived. The plantation was a chaotic scene of music, roasting pigs, and barrels of ale. My final preparations were a blur. I prepared the herbal mixture and fed it to the dogs, hidden in chunks of meat. They wouldn't be seriously harmed, but their sense of smell would be gone for a day, and their stomachs would keep them quiet. The last goodbye was the hardest. I found my mother behind our cabin. I didn't say where I was going. I didn't have to. She pulled me into a fierce hug. "Follow that gourd, my son," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Don't you look back. You just run, and you be free for all of us." I held my father's hand. He just nodded, his eyes saying everything his mouth could not. As dusk fell, I went to the big house one last time. The master was already deep in his cups, roaring with laughter with his guests. Eleonora found me in the hall. She looked radiant, flushed with her secret plan. She squeezed my hand. 2 weeks, she whispered. Our new life. I couldn't meet her eyes. I just nodded and slipped away into the growing darkness. The purse of money felt like a block of ice against my skin. My deception was complete. The ultimate betrayal was done. The promise of the double escape was the only thing pulling me forward, away from the woman I had used, away from the family I loved, and into the terrifying unknown night. My feigned story of love in chains had served its purpose. Now, only the running remained. The night of the harvest festival descended like a thick woolen blanket, muffling the world in darkness and drunken noise. The fiddles screeched from the big house lawn, a chaotic soundtrack to my liberation. This was phase 3, execution. I moved through the shadows, a ghost in my own home. My first stop was Sarah's cabin. I gave the low hoot of a screech owl. A moment later, the door creaked open and she slipped out, a small bundle in her hands. We didn't speak. A single tight clasp of our hands was all that passed between us. The plan, memorized and rehearsed in our minds 1,000 times, was now in motion. Our first move was misdirection. We headed south, the opposite direction of freedom. We knew Jacob would be watching, and he would expect us to run north. We made our way to the edge of the swamp, leaving clear, deliberate tracks in the soft mud leading into the treacherous wetlands. Then we doubled back, walking backwards in our own footprints for 100 yards, before veering off into the creek, our first and most crucial instruction from the spirituals. Wade in the water. The water was shockingly cold, stealing our breath. But it was the water of our baptism into a new life. It would wash away our scent, confusing the dogs, should they recover faster than I anticipated. We stayed in the creek for nearly a mile, moving slowly, deliberately, our feet sinking into the mud, the sounds of the festival fading behind us until they were nothing but a faint pulse. We were alone in the immense, breathing darkness. We emerged from the water and made our way to the abandoned root cellar. Our cache was safe. We quickly packed the dried meat, the hard biscuits, the repaired water skin. I secured the heavy purse Eleonora had given me deep inside my pack. The weight of it was a constant reminder of the betrayal that was funding our freedom. Then the pursuit began. It was sooner than I expected. A single gunshot echoed through the night, the signal that a runner had been discovered. Jacob must have checked the hollow log, found it mostly empty, and gone straight to the master. The drunken party was over. The hunt was on. We heard the distant baying of hounds. My herbal remedy had clearly not been as effective as I'd hoped, or they had other dogs. Panic flared, hot and sharp, but Titus's voice echoed in my mind. Run on a plan, not on fear. This is where my years of study paid off. I knew this land. I knew the game trails, the dense thickets, the paths the overseers never took. We didn't run blindly, we moved with purpose. We scrambled over rocky ground where our scent wouldn't hold. We used the bird calls we'd practiced, short, sharp signals to communicate as we navigated the treacherous terrain in the pitch black. The sound of the hunters' hoofbeats, shouting men, grew closer. We were running through a dense pine forest when we saw the flicker of their lanterns through the trees. They were fanning out, trying to corner us. We were almost caught. We dove into a tangle of fallen trees, our bodies pressed flat against the damp earth, the smell of pine needles and decaying leaves filling my nose. A rider passed so close I could hear the creak of his leather saddle, could smell the whiskey on his breath. "They went towards the swamp," he yelled to another rider. "The tracks were clear as day." Our southern misdirection had worked. It had bought us precious time. We pushed on, our lungs burning, our legs screaming. The night was a blur of trees, stars, and the constant gnawing fear. We reached the road to Frederick just as the first hint of dawn threatened to betray us. We needed to cross it, but we could hear a patrol on horseback. We were trapped. And then help came from the most unexpected of places. An old farm wagon loaded with hay was rattling down the road, driven by an old black man I had never seen before. As he drew near, he glanced towards the woods where we were hiding. He didn't slow down, but he began to sing, his voice low and raspy. It was a song I didn't know, but the words were clear. "The river is deep, the river is wide, but the shepherd's wagon has room inside." It was a code. Was he a part of the railroad, or just a kind soul? We had seconds to decide. I looked at Sarah. She nodded. It was a risk we had to take. As the wagon drew level with us, we burst from the trees. The old man didn't even look at us. He just kept singing as we scrambled over the side and buried ourselves deep in the hay. The patrol passed us moments later, giving the old farmer and his wagon barely a glance. My feigned tale of love in chains had gotten us the money, but it was this stranger's courage, this true act of solidarity that saved our lives. He dropped us 5 miles down the road near a dense wood. "The shepherd protects his flock," he said, and that was all. Godspeed. We were exhausted, scratched and bruised, but we were still moving. We were still free. The double escape, Yosh, was no longer a plan. It was a grueling, terrifying reality. The betrayal of the rich wife was a complicated, painful memory. But the hope of a future with Sarah was a burning sun pulling us north. The ultimate love in chains was not some false romance, but the bond between two people running for their lives, trusting each other in the absolute darkness. The next phase of our journey was a descent into a world of whispers and shadows. We were no longer just fugitives, we were cargo. We were passengers on the invisible train, the underground railroad. Jedediah Stone's instructions and the old farmer's help had been our entry ticket. We traveled almost exclusively by night, navigating by the North Star, which I now saw not just as a point of light, but as the eye of God watching over us. By day, we hid. We slept in haylofts, in hidden cellars, in hollowed-out trees. We were passed from one station to the next, a chain of human courage stretching from the slave states to the free ones. Our first official station was a Quaker farm. A stern-faced woman named Hannah met us at the edge of her property. She led us to her barn without a word, pointed to the hayloft, and left us with a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a bucket of fresh milk. We devoured it like starving animals. For 2 days, we heard the life of the farm happening around us, the lowing of cattle, the chatter of her children. But we remained unseen, unheard. She was risking her home, her family, for strangers. I wondered what gave her such courage. From there, a young man, Hannah's son, drove us through the night, hidden under a false bottom in his wagon, to a free black community near the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. This was a revelation. Here were men and women, our people, living in their own homes, farming their own land. They were still subject to the fear of slave catchers and the Fugitive Slave Act, but they were free. They took us in, fed us a hot meal, the first in over a week, and gave us clean clothes. An elder, a woman with eyes that had seen a century of sorrow and joy, looked at my forged pass from Eleonora. She shook her head. "This is a dangerous piece of paper, son," she said, her voice like rustling leaves. "It's a lie that tastes of the big house. It might get you through one checkpoint, but it'll get you hanged at the next if you meet a man who's truly clever." She burned it. "Your freedom ain't in a white man's forged signature. It's in your feet and in the network that protects you." She was right. The money from the rich wife, from my act of betrayal, was useful. We used it to buy passage, to pay for food from trusted sources. But our survival depended not on money, but on people. It depended on the ferryman Ishmael, a grim, silent man with the carved bird hanging from his lantern. He rowed us across the wide, dark Susquehanna River in the dead of night, the water lapping against the boat like a whispered prayer. He didn't ask our names. We didn't ask his. The shared risk was our only introduction. The journey was a constant tightrope walk. The threat of bounty hunters was everywhere. They were vultures, circling the borders of freedom, looking for easy prey. One afternoon, while hiding in a church cellar, we heard them above us, talking to the preacher. Their voices were casual, friendly, as they asked if he'd seen any runaways. The preacher, a man whose hand was shaking when he brought us our food, lied to them with a calm, steady voice. He sent them on their way with a blessing. The lie was his shield and ours. The moment we finally crossed the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania is a moment I cannot adequately describe. There was no sign, no fanfare, just a feeling. The air itself seemed different. I stopped and Sarah stopped beside me. We looked at each other. There were no words. We just stood on the soil of a free state, tears streaming down our faces, the culmination of a dream that had been nurtured in darkness and paid for with unimaginable risk. That double escape was, in this moment, a success. We were free, but freedom was a complicated word. We arrived in Philadelphia, a bustling city teeming with life. But we were still fugitives. The fugitive slave law meant that slave catchers could operate here legally. We saw the posters with faces of escaped men and women. My face could be next. We saw the way white people looked at us on the street with suspicion or with a condescending pity that was its own kind of cage. The racism was not enforced by a whip, but it was a constant, suffocating presence. It was a freedom with an asterisk. Still, it was a world of firsts. The first time I walked down a street without fear of a patrol demanding my papers. The first time I earned $1 for a day's work at the docks and it was mine to keep. The first time Sarah and I could walk together, holding hands without it being a crime. These small moments were victories, affirmations of our new life. The memory of the plantation, of the feigned love in chains, felt like a lifetime ago, a story that had happened to someone else. Yet I knew that part of me, the part that had to engage in that deep betrayal, would forever be a scar on my soul, a reminder of the price of this new world. I had escaped the chains of the rich wife, but the memory was its own kind of bond, that double escape and was complete. But the journey to true freedom was just beginning. Philadelphia was a cacophony of liberty and prejudice. We found a room in a boarding house run by a black abolitionist family, the Johnsons. For the first time, we had a door we could lock, a simple thing, a lock. But for us, it was a symbol of a whole new world, a world where we had a space that was ours, a space the master could not enter. The money from Eleonora, the fruit of my great betrayal, was our foundation. It wasn't the fortune of a millionaire as the clickbait titles might scream, but it was enough. It kept us from starving. It allowed me to buy a set of carpenter's tools. I'd learned the trade watching the craftsmen on the plantation, and in the north, a man with a skill could make a living. I found work repairing furniture, building shelves, my hands finally working for my own pocket, for my own future. Sarah found work as a seamstress, her fingers as nimble with a needle as they had been picking cotton. We were building a life, one nail, one stitch at a time. But freedom wasn't just about survival, it was about purpose. We were survivors, and we had a story to tell. Mr. Johnson introduced us to William Still, a leader of the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee. He was a conductor, a historian, and the recording angel of the Underground Railroad. In his office, surrounded by letters and records, I told him our story. I told him about the secret songs, the trial run, the deception of the rich wife, the escape. I even confessed the guilt I felt over the calculated performance of love in chains. He listened patiently, his eyes full of a deep, sorrowful understanding. "Son," he said when I finished, "do not let the guilt of your methods overshadow the righteousness of your cause. You did what you had to do to break chains that should never have been forged. You used the Master's tools to dismantle the Master's house. Your story is not one of sin, it is one of ingenuity and survival. It is a story of resistance." His words were a balm on my soul. He encouraged me to speak, to share my experience at abolitionist meetings. At first I was terrified to stand before a crowd of people, white and black, and speak my truth felt more frightening than facing down hunting dogs. But Sarah encouraged me. "Your voice is free now, Elias," she said. "You have to use it." So I did. I spoke in churches and meeting halls. I told them not just of the horrors, but of our humanity. I spoke of my mother's courage, of old man Titus's wisdom, of the stranger in the hay wagon. I told them that we were not just victims, we were thinkers, planners, fighters. My story, and others like it, became a weapon in the fight against slavery, putting a human face to the institution they sought to abolish. We became part of the network ourselves. Our small room often became a temporary station for new arrivals, fresh from the South. We would feed them, hide them, and pass them further north to Canada, where they would be truly safe from the reach of the Fugitive Slave Act. Seeing the hope and fear in their eyes, I saw myself. Helping them was a way of repaying the debt I owed to every person who had helped us. It was how we turned our double escape into a lifeline for others. Years passed. We saved enough money to buy a small house. Sarah and I were married, not by a master's permission, but by our own choice, in a church full of our new community. We had 2 children, a son and a daughter. When I held my son for the first time, I thought of Samuel, my aunt's boy, torn from his mother's arms. I wept, but this time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of a promise fulfilled. My son would never know the feel of a chain or the sight of an auction block. I never heard what became of Eleonora. I often wondered if she went to the Quaker meeting house, if she waited. The thought is a ghost that walks with me still. Was my use of her a necessary evil? I have to believe it was. My legacy is not in the money I carried or the betrayal I committed. My legacy is in my children's laughter. It's in the families that we helped guide to freedom. It's in the story itself, a testament that even in the deepest darkness, the human spirit can plot a course to the North Star. The twisted path of love in chains led to a true and lasting love. The difficult choice to betray the rich wife led to the salvation of my family. Our double escape became a story whispered to inspire others. My name is Elias. I was born a slave, but I will die a free man. I am a husband, a father, a builder, and a storyteller. My story is one of millions, a single thread in the vast, resilient tapestry of Black resistance. What are the stories of resistance in your family? The stories of survival, of courage, of building a new life against all odds. Share them, honor them. For in these stories, we find the true meaning of freedom.